If you've been sitting at home thinking, aren't we due for a new TOQ? You'd be right. So here we are with a brand new episode. If you like the videos, please hit like and subscribe. Now let's go see the one and only Steve Hayes, the tired old queen of the movies.
Oh, Johnny, one of the movies that I have been dying to do forever and never got around to it, so I'm doing it now, was 1945's The Picture of Dorian Gray, directed by Albert Lewin and starring Hurd Hatfield, George Sanders, Angela Lansbury, Donna Reed, and Peter Lawford. Now, this was based on a novel by Oscar Wilde, a very, very famous novel, and it concerns the late 1800s London. And this lord goes to visit his friend who's a painter. And this lord is played by George Sanders. And his friend is painting this beautiful young man.
And I'm afraid Dorian Gray will pay for his good looks.
Dorian Gray, is that his name?
And as he's painting him, the Lord says, "It's a pity that you haven't really experienced life as you want to, you know."
But there is only one thing in the world worth having, and that is youth.
And Dorian sees the portrait and says, "Oh, I would give anything if the portrait would get old and I could stay young." Well, the painter gives Dorian a portrait and also an Egyptian artifact, and it happens.
Yes, there's nothing in the whole world I would not give. I would give my soul for that.
Dorian proceeds to stay young and beautiful and becomes, thanks to George Sanders, becomes a very corrupt individual.
Live. Let nothing be lost upon you. Be afraid of nothing.
He and George Sanders go to this nightclub in the bad parts of London, and he meets this young singer, poor, pretty, called Sibyl Vane, who's played by Angela Lansbury. And she falls in love with him. And Dorian convinces her to give up her virginity and go to bed with him.
Why do you look at me so strangely?
What would you do, Sibyl, if I should say to you, don't leave me now? Don't go home.
And then she's really so in love with him. He's going to marry her. Of course, he's marrying beneath his class. And George Sanders says to him, "Well, really, how do you know that you were the first one? How do you know that you are her only lover? The best way is to leave her alone for a period of time and find out if she really does love you. Break it off and see how she really reacts."
I believe she loves you so much you have no need to marry her.
What wickedness are you contemplating now?
So he breaks the romance, breaks her heart, goes off on his own. And when he comes back, she has killed herself.
By mistake, they say. She died instantaneously. It's tragic, of course, but you mustn't let yourself brood over it. You must learn to see it in its proper perspective.
And his life just proceeds to get more and more debauched. And every time he looks at the portrait seems to get older and older. And he keeps it up in a room in his place. And eventually there comes a time when it's time to pay the piper. And I'm not going to tell you anything other than that. This movie is almost like a film dream. It was Louis B. Mayer at MGM's favorite movie of all the movies that they ever did. Hurd Hatfield, it was his most famous role. And he really resented Albert Lewin because Albert Lewin said to him, "I don't want you to have any expression on your face in this movie at all. None." So Hatfield remains beautiful.
It's only shallow people who require years to get rid of an emotion. A man who is master of himself can end a sorrow as easily as he can invent a pleasure.
But he said, everybody thought that I couldn't act. Everybody thought that was just the way it was, that's all I could do. So he said, I had a very hard time having a career after that. 2 years after this movie was made, he did a really good job in a film noir called The Unsuspected over at Warner Brothers. And he proceeded to have a career all the way through. He and Angela Lansbury became very close friends. And later on, when she had Murder, She Wrote, he used to guest star on it all the time because she was very loyal to all the people she worked with. This was only Angela Lansbury's second movie. And she got her second Academy Award nomination for this movie.
My own happiness.
She'd gotten the previous year, she'd been nominated at 19 for Gaslight. Ironically, she lost to Anne Revere as who played her mother in National Velvet the same year. So she went on to, of course, to have a career. She was labeled a character actress. Marsha Hunt had the same problem. She was pretty, she was versatile, she could do anything. And so they kind of labeled her a character actress, and she didn't make it up into big lead parts. For example, not long after this movie was done, she desperately wanted to play Milady in The Three Musketeers. And she went to Louis B. Mayer and said, "You know I can do this. You know I could play this part in a minute." And he said, "No." He said, "We're going to give it to Lana Turner. You'll play the Queen instead in this." And she always had that part. When she was in Samson and Delilah, which we did on Tired Old Queen at the movies, she had to play the younger sister who gets a spear chucked through her. Well, of course, she turned in incredible performances, especially in The Manchurian Candidate, which she was nominated again for. And then Broadway beckoned. She did Mame, the musical, and she won a slew of Tony Awards, and which led her to television. And she had 12 years in Murder, She Wrote before she passed away. I got to see her once as Madame Arcady, her last Tony Award in Life Spirit. And I also got to see her in A Little Night Music with Catherine Zeta-Jones. And she was lovely. She was just, there's nobody like Angela Lansbury. George Sanders had come over. He was from Russia originally. But his family moved to Great Britain. He was one of 11 children. And he had a brother, Tom Conway, who also sounded just like him, had that same speech, that same demeanor, urbane demeanor, and had that same speech. And George Sanders started the series, the Falcon series of detective movies, The Saint, and he left the series and Tom Conway took over, because he was the next, well, let's get the next best thing to George Sanders. Let's get his brother. All right. Tom Conway never had the career Sanders did. Sanders was always the urbane villain, never more so than his Oscar-winning role as Addison DeWitt in All About Eve. But he was always a great, great actor with the most incredible voice. And he could sing, as we saw in Call Me Madam with Ethel Merman. And he loved singing. He had a really, really good time in that. Years ago, I was bartending at a party at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And this distinguished gentleman walked up to the bar. He had an ascot on. He was in his late 70s, early 80s, probably the age I am now. And I looked at him, and of course, being who I am, I looked at him and I went, "Oh my God, you're Hurd Hatfield." And he went, I am. Yes, I am. I said, I'm a comedian. He didn't know that. Yes, I know. No, he didn't. I said, I'm a comedian. And I do a thing in my act about the worst movies ever made. And you were in one of them. And he said, "Really? And what was that?" I said, "Dragon Seed." He said, "Oh, you're right." And I said, "I do Katharine Hepburn, as a Chinese woman saying, 'Take the rice to the hut of my father.'" He said, "Oh, you don't do my favorite Katharine Hepburn line?" I said, "No, what's your favorite Katharine Hepburn line?" He said, "My children will not teeth on Japanese bullets." And I had him sign this napkin, and he's been on my wall. Hurd has been on my wall ever since. I just loved him. Sweet, and he still had bone structure. Oh my God. He was like the Everest. You never saw such high cheekbones in your life. Gorgeous man in his later years. And so sweet. And I think you're going to be fascinated by Hurd Hatfield, Angela Lansbury, George Sanders, Donna Reed, and Peter Lawford in Albert Lewin's Picture of Dorian Gray.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to
Like he was an old homo on the range.
to get ourselves a treat.